accompany him. But then she seemed very upset about the mention of her father. Mary saw them off and said that this way would lead them directly to the arena where the exam was being held. They should be careful when they climb the stairs. They have to find their place and wait until their name is called. After that, the two of them went into a huge hall. At the moment, they have already fought there. The bald guy told his opponent that he was very good at dodging. Well, how will he dodge it? And he used his infernal blow. Arthur wondered why he was talking about his next move. In the same way that spellcasters cast spells in order to better imagine the image in their head, many amplifiers have also decided to voice the name of their attacks. But, of course, his opponent easily repelled his attack. Jasmine had already found a place for them and Arthur was following her. Watching their fight, he thought that, although for such a simple movement, it seemed somewhat superfluous. The man asked how. His opponent sighed and said that it was good. Firstly, there are grandmothers who can swing their canes better than he can swing his pole. He depends too much on physical strength compared to his strengthening of the village with the help of mana, thereby upsetting the balance of his attack. And his attacks are laughably predictable. Judging by his appearance, he is 35, but he is only at the dark orange stage. The man could not stand it and began to cry. He said that, but he had completed his training. 100 push-ups, 100 abs, 100 squats. The examiner was just horrified by this. He told him that he usually puts someone of his caliber in the E class, but considering that he has an affinity with fire, he stuck a piece of paper to it and said that D class and congratulated him on it. Then the next one was called. Diana Whitehall was the next to enter the arena. Diana said yes, she was coming, but then she tripped and fell. The man, seeing this, shouted that cool granny panties. Some guy, also sitting in the auditorium, he said that shouldn't she have been assigned an E class just because of her clumsiness. Stop wasting their time already. Arthur looked at this guy and realized that he was strong. Meanwhile, Diana had already entered the arena and, introducing herself, said that she was 18 years old. The core stage was solid orange. It has an affinity with water. The woman told her that she did not need to introduce herself because they already have information about her. She must prepare her weapons and know that there are medical personnel and a radiator here in case any injuries are sustained during the exam. Diana said yes. Arthur thought that as soon as the caster reaches the orange stage, it becomes clear with which element he has a high level of affinity. Instead of trying to become an adapter of all four elements, it would be much more effective to focus solely on the element with which they have a high level of affinity. He had heard that for casters who claim a high level of affinity with 2 or more elements, the exam would be stricter in order to make sure whether the applicants were really telling the truth. The woman stood in front of her and said that now they would see what she was like in business. Diana cast some kind of spell. Jasmine said that since spellcasters aren't as adept at strengthening their mana bodies as boosters, they are trained to take defensive measures first during battle. The examiner also uttered some kind of spell. Arthur thought that the examiner had used this spell to restrict Diana's view in her protective sphere from the water. Everyone was watching. One of the guys was surprised and asked if the water had turned into a cloud of fog. They don't even see the examiner. But when the pair dispersed, the examiner they were in place. She was already behind her. After which she was hit, she said that she had to admit that her level of control was quite decent, and the last sequence of spells was well worked out. She was a little overconfident about not preparing another defensive measure, but overall her mana control and spell preparation speed were good, so she gave her a grade. Arthur thought that this class at her age was something she should definitely be proud of. After that, the next one was announced. But then, for some reason, several examiners gathered. Arthur immediately tensed up because he thought something was wrong. One of the examiners said he had been informed of his situation. He is hereby awarded the title of adventurer in the class. Everyone was very surprised. Arthur thought, what's in the classroom? And he didn't even have to take the exam. Who? The guy with glasses got up here. After that, the man announced that the next Lucas Wykes. Then the arrogant guy got up and said that finally. He asked the examiner that why didn't she just let him go ahead by assigning a grade. The examiner did not pay attention to his words and said that his name was Lucas and he was 11 years old. He is a caster with a light orange stage and has an affinity with one element, fire. Arthur was very surprised and thought that the light orange stage at 11 years old. The examiner looked at Lucas and thought what an arrogant brat, and told him they needed to get started. Lucas said they would start now. He ordered his protector to rise up. One of the examiners said that a stable and a decent-sized guardian of the flame. It looks like they have a particularly gifted one today. The guy next to him said yes, which was to be expected from a member of the Wykes family. Lucas cast some kind of spell. His examiner said it looks like he didn't just fill it with hot air, but his disrespect shows that he needs to learn restraint. Then she cast the spell herself. Arthur thought it was a good move on the part of the examiner. The guardian of the flame will be naturally extinguished as soon as he uses up the oxygen that is inside the coffin. But Lucas told the examiner it was too late. He had heard that there were no cases where an examiner was injured during the evaluation of new adventurers. Well, he would honor her to be the first. The examiner called him a brat again. But then she beat off all the fireballs that flew straight at her. Lucas cast some spell again. The examiner deftly dodged. But still the examiner turned out to be stronger. The woman let him go and thanked him for his time. His reserve, mana, and ability to learn high-level spells with an affinity for fire speaks of his potential. But that Lucas attacked her surreptitiously and said that this was not all. The exam is not over yet. But then another examiner intervened and helped his girlfriend. Lucas told him that how dare he interfere with his exam. The examiner told him that he was the one who broke the rules and suddenly used a spell despite finishing the exam. Lucas said that this damn witch was the one who got into the range of his next attack, blocking those fire rays. She was the one who thought the exam was over, even though he had everything under control. The man turned to his examiner and told her not to be shy about complaining. In the meantime, let Emily announce the result to him. Emily said that as she said earlier, his mana reserve and control are excellent. Despite the disadvantages that appear due to lack of experience, it is more than reasonable to assign it to a class. Lucas was going up to the stands again and was very angry. One of the guys said that he was doing well and congratulated him on getting into the class. Lucas called them stupid monkeys and told them not to even try to compare him to themselves, which was served to the class on a silver platter. He sat down in his seat and said that they were fools. Let them just wait for the moment when his father hears about it. Apparently, Arthur's next turn came. Jasmine wished him luck. Arthur was coming down and thought, what is the best way for him to get close to a warrior of this kind? He had years of training and experience with the sword, and his movements were fast and precise, but his defense was not without gaps. Then this examiner hurried him, said that they could not spend the whole day on this. Arthur came out and bowed to him. The examiner said it looked like he was taking the exam under special conditions as they didn't have any information about him. Then they'll see what it's made of. But then he tensed up and thought, what is this sudden pressure? But someone interrupted there and said that was enough. Everyone was very surprised by this. Caspian came out and told George that it was enough, let him go. He will be the one who will evaluate this examinee. George was surprised and asked if he would personally evaluate this candidate. Let him change it if it sounds rude, but there is no need for the AA class to stoop to the assessment in the exam, especially for a magician of his caliber. If it was because of his indecision, then he had considered how much power to use. Caspian said that he did not doubt his abilities. He just feels obligated to evaluate him personally, seeing what the connection is between them and his sponsor. That shouldn't be a problem, should it? Everyone began to closely follow their duel. Arthur thought that the person standing in front of him was not only the head of the Adventurers Guild branch in their city, but was also an AA class adventurer himself. He had no gaps in defense, and the pressure caused by his bloodlust was huge, as if he wasn't going to conduct the exam as usual. So why is he so excited? Caspian told him to get ready and not take the special relationship to heart. Arthur just nodded at him. Then Caspian attacked him. Arthur understood that he was very fast. Caspian was surprised by the abilities. Arthur even wounded him. Caspian wiped away the blood and said that it was excellent. Then he rushed into battle again. While they were fighting, it was obvious what his flaws were. Arthur's muscles were underdeveloped, and he was more than a foot shorter than what he was used to when he was in his prime. His body was also stronger due to the assimilation of Dragon and Sylvia. But it was still not enough against a veteran fighter whose body was strengthened and clothed with dense mana. Then Caspian told him that he should apologize for underestimating him. Now he will become a little more serious. Arthur thought that at that moment his body was screaming for him to run away. Caspian said it looked like Jasmine had chosen someone worthwhile after all. Arthur dodged all his attacks and thought that wind bullets are very fast and almost invisible, but their trajectory is predictable. He needs to close the distance if he wants to have at least a small but real chance of success. And he did it. He was within reach. Caspian thought that he was a magician with an affinity for fire. The result should have been obvious. Caspian is an AA class adventurer who is able to use long-range spells that would cause most of the boosters to be dead. So why is he so nervous right now? Caspian told Arthur not to be so presumptuous. Jasmine was frightened and jumped up, calling out to Arthur. Arthur thought he hadn't recovered his balance yet. Did he lose his temper or something? After their battle began to continue, and SH Thor thought he had gone too far. Caspian said it was impressive. Arthur thought that the speed of his cast had increased. He keeps pushing him to play more of his cards. Yes, let it be so. Caspian has already witnessed his explosive move, but this spell he invented is showing its best side. When used continuously over and over again, Caspian thought, is he really going to accept defeat? Then Caspian threw Arthur aside. Jasmine realized that everything was getting out of control and was about to rush to his aid. Arthur said, to hell with it. There are two directions in the lightning school: external magic and internal magic. The books say that inner magic is too difficult for magicians to master, and it's not worth paying attention to it because of a small increase in strength. But he does not agree with this. With his increased speed and reflexes, he should be able to dodge everything. He hopes so. Arthur was about to rush into battle, but then Caspian put away his sword. Caspian said he got a little carried away trying to find out his potential, so he apologizes for that. Considering the fact that he hid his abilities so stubbornly until the very end, he can only assume that he wants to be assigned a low rank. Arthur thought that was how he noticed. After that, it was announced that he had been promoted to the rank. Everyone was shocked by Arthur's strength. Lucas was very angry. Caspian was about to leave and turning around, looking at Arthur, asked what he hoped he had no problems with it. Arthur just nodded. After that, Jasmine came running to the map with Sylvie. George said it was the last exam for today. Everyone has to go to the front desk in order to get their adventurer card, so everyone should disperse. Caspian returned to his office and started producing again, remembering his entire fight with Arthur. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, but then two examiners fell out into his office. George asked him to explain what was going on. Caspian told them to close the door behind them when they come in. After that, two examiners carefully closed the door. Emily asked what was going on. There were more class candidates today than in the last 4 months. George said that, not to mention that all three of them looked like children. The light orange stage at the age of 11 is unheard of among people. Arthur asked them that they both remember what happened 6 months ago here in Xyrus, right? Emily said that was when the first tournament between 3 races took place, didn't she? Caspian said exactly what. Most of the Adventurers Guild staff hadn't been informed yet, but he had been notified a few weeks ago that the ban on elves and dwarves obtaining adventurer licenses in Sapin had been lifted. He took out these documents and said that there were several distinguished examinees in today's group. George asked if he meant to say that all 3 were either dwarves or elves. Caspian said that Lucas is a half-elf who lives in Sapin. Information about his birth is classified, but he guesses that he was most likely born from an elf slave. Their house has always had a bad reputation due to the fact that they use nefarious methods to breed the best magicians of their kind. Although he is an unusual case, to have such a strong affinity with fire despite his elf bloodline. He was born at the age of 8, which is early even by elven standards, and he was forced to become an adventurer in order to further improve his abilities through real battles. It seems that his family has realized that the beast cores and elixirs no longer have a significant effect on his growth. On the other hand, Elijah Knight is a real mystery. According to the dossier, his origin is unknown, but he grew up among dwarves from a young age. He was sent as one of the first representatives of the Kingdom of Darv in order to settle down in the human kingdom. Emily asked what it was why he was automatically assigned to the class without conducting an exam with him. Caspian said that Mr. Knight woke up only a few months ago and is now only in the dark red stage. Despite this, his abilities were confirmed and the person who sponsors him is not someone he could argue with, although he's still curious about what his abilities are. But about today's masked amplifier, George, remembering his exclamation, swallowed. Caspian said that, to be honest, he has no idea who this note is. He is clearly not a representative of a noble family of elves or dwarves. He is sure of that. He was just curious about what kind of person he was, since Jasmine was his sponsor. Emily was surprised and asked if Flamesworth was from the Flamesworth house, a house that is famous for the fact that the most powerful magicians in their kingdom are born and brought up in it, who have an affinity with fire, right? George said that was why he was so skilled in fire magic. Caspian said that the information he had just shared with both of them would soon become public. However, he very much hopes that the two of them will refrain from discussing this issue with others until an official statement is made. They agreed with him and then left. Caspian lay back in his chair and thought that this amplifier was wearing a mask. His magic and fire is unique and also very effective. But George is wrong. It is the art of swordsmanship that makes him a real monster, although his movements were a bit erratic at times, as if he wasn't used to his own body yet. But he can't even imagine how terrifying he will be when he grows up. However, with the lifting of the ban, elves and dwarves will be able to become not only adventurers here, but also students. This continent is truly entering an exciting new era. Tess was at the palace right now, remembering all her moments spent with Arthur, how she contacted him, and how he introduced her to Lily. She thought she should be happy that he was back home and having a good time with his family. But who is this girl? Isn't Arthur communicating with her too well? How insidious. She became a friend of Arthur. She went into her room and fell on the bed. She said maybe she should have treated him better while he was here. But no, it's Arthur's mistake that he always treated her like a child. She looked at the crystal ball where his reflection was and said he was a fool. Then her grandfather burst into her room and said that he had good news. He sees that she is using this ball again. But at that moment Tess threw a pillow at him, and I asked him what she said about knocking. Virian said he was all for Arthur to become his grandson. But in his opinion, it's a little early for that, don't you think? Tess kept throwing pillows at him, and shouted that it was an abomination. Virian sat down next to his granddaughter and told her not to sulk now. He has good news for her. Tess sat with her back to him and said she was listening. Grandpa asked what if he said that she would have the opportunity to attend the same school as Arthur. Tess was very happy and asked if it was really true. He's not lying to her right now, is he? Is it really true? Would she really be able to go to school with Arthur? Then her parents came to her room. Mom told her daughter to calm down. And yes, it's true that her grandfather has close ties with the director of the Xyrus Academy. Virian said that it was a sly old fox bragging to him that she had found an amp that has an affinity with 4 elements, while he was the one who trained him. The father told his daughter that, but it's a little harder than just sending her to school. Mom asked what she remembers about the Continental Tournament. Right. My father said that, in general, it was just the beginning. They discussed the joint conditions for the training of young generations, elves, dwarves together with people at the Xyrus Academy. Virian said that the director told him that Arthur plans to be an adventurer for 3 years. So if everything goes smoothly, then by the time he starts attending the academy, she will already be in high school. The father told his daughter that, so let her train hard with her grandfather. After all, they will be the beginning of a new generation. Jasmine asked Arthur if he was okay. Arthur said yes, it was actually fun. Anyway, they're familiar with Caspian, aren't they? Jasmine looked away, and she said that in a sense, yes. Her father has close ties with some people from the Adventurers Guild, and Caspian is one of them. At that moment, the girl called Arthur. While Arthur was silking the registration lines, he heard people whispering about him. They came to the registration. The girl thanked them for waiting. She said she was informed of the results of his staged fight. She handed him a card and told him that on behalf of the Adventurers Guild of the Sapin Kingdom, he should allow him to congratulate him and welcome him into their ranks. Arthur took this card, and he and Jasmine were about to leave. But then someone called out to him. These were the 3 people who admired him now and said it was really cool. Sylvie told them to go better and practice, calling them plebeians. Jasmine put her hand on his shoulder and said that he might be a beginner, but now he is an adventurer. He's one of them. Arthur thought he was an adventurer now. As a note, he is now free from the bonds that held Arthur's life back. But today's fight with Caspian clarified a lot for him. He had spent too much time both adapting and learning the magic system of this world. The animal will of Sylvia, honing your elemental magic. He was so absorbed in his abilities, which he acquired when he came to this world, that he refused to learn what he was best at before. In the past, he had used most of his meager supply of Kai to refine the simplest techniques. In this world, its limitations do not exist, so he should continue to practice magic or... Then he got lost in thought and bumped into some guy. Then I apologized to him for it, but it was the same guy who was assigned to the class, and who didn't even take part in the duel. Arthur thought that today he was one of the examinees. This is the one who was also assigned to the class, but without passing the exam. The guy said that everything was fine. Then Lucas came up to them and asked what is this? Did the 2 of them know each other? Or is there a meeting for new adventurers in the class that he should know about? Arthur asked why what? Was he planning to throw a tantrum again if it was her? Lucas told him not to be impertinent just because they were in the same class. Even inside the classes there are subclasses, and they, the commoners, will end up at the bottom. He must not forget about it. After that, he walked past Arthur and deliberately brushed him with his shoulder. Arthur thought what a template behavior for an annoying side character. Then Jasmine arrived and asked what had happened. Arthur said nothing, he was just talking to. But this guy has already left. He asked Jasmine what and so, what's next? Does she want to take the assignment from the bulletin board or has she already taken it? Jasmine said that with his skills, doing this would be a waste of time, so she has something else in mind. They left the Adventurers Guild and went somewhere. They came to the portal, which was guarded by 2 men. They blocked their way and told them that traveling to the animal glades required a license or permit. They showed the guards their adventurer IDs. Jasmine asked Arthur if he needed to stock up on anything before they hit the road. Arthur said he had brought with him everything he would need for the next week. Jasmine said that then they would go. Then they went through the portal. It was very beautiful and there was a lot of greenery. Arthur began to look around and asked, "What are these animal glades? Isn't it too quiet here?" Jasmine said they had arrived at an outpost at the foot of the Great Mountains. Most of this area has already been explored. Low-grade adventurers also use this area for training and collecting ingredients for quests. Now they were looking at a man who was hunting for some kind of animal. Jasmine said that the liquids these animals produce in their odorous glands are used in many potions and elixirs. Therefore, there are always tasks for them. After that, they passed by this man. Arthur asked what could help him. Jasmine said that she needed to leave him, it would strengthen her character. Then Sylvie noticed some kind of animal and rushed to him. And the curtains asked her that where was she going. Looking at her, he thought that eating in order to become stronger. Jasmine said she must be thrilled with all this wild nature soaked in mana. Does he want to follow her? Arthur said she was fine. He can still feel her clearly because of their connection. Jasmine said that animal glades have a denser mana level, so the range of their connection with Sylvia will be much larger, so they need to hurry up. Their one stop will be at the end of the day. It becomes quite unsafe at night, so he should try to keep up. Arthur looked at Sylvie and wondered if this was how parents felt when their child went to school for the first time. She must be very careful. After all the training, Arthur lay down on the grass and thought that, of course, if it wasn't for the mana circulation technique that Sylvia taught him, he would never have been able to keep up with her. Jasmine asked him that he was at the light red stage, wasn't he? She is impressed, despite the fact that she has slowed down a little. She brought wood for the fire and said she thought they would have to stop and rest a few times. Then they built a fire. Jasmine sat down next to Arthur and asked that his mana beast hadn't turned around yet. Was she alright? Arthur said that Sylvie was telling him about the latest developments. She is very happy here. Jasmine said she thinks having to be indoors most of the time puts quite a lot of pressure on her. Arthur said yes, she was definitely enjoying life. After that there was a long silence, which was interrupted by Arthur, asking why Jasmine wanted to become an adventurer. But Jasmine didn't answer him. Then Arthur tensed up and thought that had he really touched a sore spot. But after a while, Jasmine said that she wanted to distance herself from her family. Arthur remembered all his guesses and remembered how she behaved when it came to her family and thought that meant he was right. Jasmine said that everything is fine. She knows he noticed it back in the Adventurers Guild. Her family made a great contribution to the war against the elves. Their house has produced many powerful magicians, both spellcasters and amplifiers. Their bloodline, which has an affinity with fire, is second to none. They are very proud of this, because fire is considered the strongest of the elements. Therefore, when she woke up earlier than all her brothers and sisters, her parents had high hopes for her. But when all the tests she had to go through and showed that she did not have an affinity with fire, her family began to consider her insignificant. Arthur shouted that it was stupid. He understands that there is a difference between the levels of the mana core, but this is completely unreasonable. No, it is rather absurd to create a hierarchy for magicians based on affinity with the elements. There is not a single elementary affinity that would initially be better than the rest. It all depends on how well the magician can apply it. After hearing all this from Arthur, Jasmine couldn't stand it and laughed. Arthur blushed all over. Jasmine apologized to him and said that he was just usually so reserved. She is very surprised that he is so angry about it. Arthur thought that he must have just been overexcited, remembering his past life. The biggest flaw he had back then, there was in his Danshan similar to the core of the mana of this world, which was weaker than the average. Danshan is a place where vital energy, that is, Kai, arrives and is stored. And yet, in this world with elementary affinity and a dark yellow core, at the age of only 24, Jasmine has shunned her own family. Arthur said it's just not fair, all of it. Jasmine shook her head and said that whether it was amps against spellcasters or one element against another ellipsis, she has long since come to terms with the fact that people are always looking for ways to feel superior. It's just their nature. Besides, the twin horns treated her well. Arthur looked at Jasmine and thought that for the first time, the always aloof and cold Jasmine, when she smiled and laughed, seemed vulnerable. After that, Jasmine took Arthur by the hand and put out the fire with his element, and then they went to bed. Then Jasmine called Arthur. She said that, looking back, she thinks she could have made him choose him as her guard. She is not the most friendly and sociable, and also not the smartest of the Gemini horns, so maybe they should have asked his opinion first. Arthur said she was surprisingly gentle. Jasmine released a small stream of wind into him and said that it was not good to tease the elders. Arthur said he was genuinely glad she volunteered. She's not afraid to tell him when he's wrong, and he knows that this is what he needs. Moreover, he is sometimes inclined to go a little too far. Jasmine was a little surprised. Arthur said they really needed to get some sleep. Jasmine said it was strange. When she talks to him, she doesn't feel like she's talking to a child. Jasmine thought he must have fallen asleep. It was already morning, and Sylvie finally returned. Arthur said it was too heavy to sleep on it, but what he saw shocked him. It wasn't Sylvie, some kind of scary black monster, and when Arthur realized what it was, he jumped up and screamed. He smelled food, and I saw a fried fish not far from me. Jasmine said she liked this little comedy show, and wished Arthur a good morning. Arthur said she should have woken him up to help her with her morning duties. Jasmine said she tried to wake him up, but he didn't even move. Arthur apologized and said that he had such a bad habit. Jasmine said that since he was awake, they needed to eat, and let him ask his beast if he will join them. Arthur said it was fine, and contacted Sylvie, calling her to eat. But Sylvie had already caught the monster that had landed on Arthur, and told him that she had food. Arthur saw it all and thought that it was disgusting and said that he thought she would be alright. After that, the two of them had breakfast and had already started to get ready. Arthur asked where they were going now. Jasmine said that in general, one of the reasons why she brought him here is to spar with him. Arthur asked what sparring was. Jasmine said that she noticed that his fighting style seems strange sometimes, as if he understands how to do it with his head, but his body does not obey him. Arthur said it was a good idea, and I asked her what it was about sparring, of what kind she was thinking. Jasmine took out her sword and said that she needed to know its physical limits before they went to the dungeon or took on missions. Therefore, he must limit the use of his mana and accept it only in order to blunt his blade. Arthur got up and said he understood, and he was already reaching for his sword. But Jasmine stopped him and told him to use his other blade. Arthur was very surprised. He turned around and asked that how did she know it was a blade. Jasmine said he was too practical to carry an ordinary wooden stick for no reason. Arthur took the same blade and asked her what was wrong. Should they arrange a sparring here? Jasmine told him to follow her. When they came to the right place, Arthur drew his sword. Jasmine looked at this one in surprise and thought, is it really a sword? Arthur told her they would start as soon as she was ready. Jasmine said it was fine. Arthur wondered how long it had been since he had fought without strengthening himself with mana. Then he rushed into battle. Jasmine easily deflected his attack, and she attacked him herself. Arthur thought that his sparring with Jasmine confirmed his fears that he had after the battle with Caspian, being almost obsessed with the despair of the new and wonderful, which was magic. He has become the most confident in his swordsman skills since he came to this world. His skills in magic became a pillar on which he relied too much. This only hid its limits and shortcomings. After a while, he collapsed and told Jasmine that she had won. Jasmine said that his physical data is not enough, and sometimes he has awkward movements, but he compensates for this with the accuracy of his techniques. Also, his intuitions, reflexes are at the highest level, almost frightening. Arthur thanked her and said that, but he knows she gave him a head start. Jasmine asked him what he saw. Frightening intuition, but he will naturally become stronger during the mission and dungeon hikes, even using magic. And as soon as he becomes a teenager, well, the tour, getting up, interrupted her and said that it was too long. He is several years ahead of his peers in mana manipulation, so he will focus exclusively on sword fighting, not relying on mana. Jasmine was surprised and asked if he really wanted to go down to the dungeon and not use mana there. Even warriors who dare to make such a reckless experience, it takes decades to master the art of swordsmanship. She knows he's good, but Arthur said 2 years. That's all he needs. 2 years later, the little diner was very crowded right now. One of the guys asked if he knew about that rumor. The man told Kagalu that if he was talking about that famous swordsman in a mask, then these rumors are bullshit. The man at the next table said no. Apparently, this is true. Once his acquaintance seemed to be on the same team with him. He travels with Jasmine, and he himself is short, so it's hard not to notice him. The man with the scar asked what his so-called acquaintance had told him about him. The man said he thinks the rumors are true. He is not a magician. The man with the scar said it was nonsense. Either this masked swordsman is an amplifier, or these rumors are exaggerated. Have they even heard what stories are going around about him? It was even as if he had cleared the dungeon alone. Is it even possible? B-rank boosters can't even handle low-level dungeons alone. And he invites him to believe that an ordinary swordsman did it. Cahal said that yes, he would consider parts of these rumors with a grain of salt. He shouldn't forget that Jasmine was with him. She probably helped him in the dungeon, didn't she? The man with the scar said that it was, and he was telling them, the thick-headed dummies, that this swordsman probably wasn't that strong. Surely half of these rumors are the merit of Jasmine. Some half-witted warrior called himself a swordsman. Let them drag him here, because he will beat him at any time. He called the waitress and asked where his drink was. Cahal thought that he still couldn't believe that this masked swordsman was such a hot topic right now. According to some rumors, he was a disciple of Jasmine. And even if it's far-fetched, the most absurd thing is not only that he was assigned a rank immediately after the exam, but also that he recently rose to a rank. If this is true, then he got a rank just 2 years after starting his career, and he's still here, an adventurer with a rank who is on the verge due to the fact that he can't cope with the test for raising the rank for the last 3 years. Now he understands why Thurman got angry. After all, he is a veteran booster in rank. This masked swordsman must be quite a painful topic for his inflated pride. But then the door opened and someone came into them. Everyone immediately turned around to see who it was. But what they saw shocked them. It was the masked swordsman. Thurman immediately grabbed his sword and said that he was easy to talk about. It's that tiny swordsman everyone's talking about. Cahal thought that it really was that masked swordsman, the one they were talking about. The reason for all these crazy rumors is here in the flesh. Cahal got up and called out to Thurman. He asked him what he was trying to do, but Thurman paid no attention to him and, approaching Arthur, asked, where is his cute little defender? She stayed outside, after which, he walked past him and was about to leave. But then he stopped and, calling Arthur, asked if he was ignoring him. He laughed and said that just because he became a little more famous thanks to these shitty rumors, he thinks he's better than him, or what? And he has already swung his sword. The fat guy shouted at him to calm down. He knows he can't kill anyone here. But Thurman was unstoppable. He struck at Arthur, but when he saw what had happened, he was very surprised and asked what was what. He wondered if he had dodged or if he had missed. Arthur looked at him without turning around. Thurman already shuddered, and then a wild rage took him. He raised his sword again and rushed at Arthur again. But Arthur deftly dodged. Thurman asked that he only knows how to dodge, or what, but that Arthur himself swung his sword. He cut off Thurman's 4 fingers. These 4 fingers just held his sword. Thurman clutched his wounded arm and began to scream in pain. Arthur walked up to him and stepped on his sword. Thurman looked at him and asked how dare he. But after that, everyone felt very strong pressure. From fear, no one could move and say something. Everyone just froze. Arthur asked Thurman what he had finished. Cahal shouted for them to quickly bring an ice pack for his fingers. They can still return them to their place with the help of an emitter. Arthur went up to the bar himself and, putting some coins, told the girl that they should have a bag with greetings in the name of Noda. The girl was shaking all over and said that yes, she would bring it right away. Then he took what he needed and just left. Jasmine was already waiting for him on the street and asked why he took so long. Arthur approached his horse and said that it took the waitress a while to find provisions. Jasmine asked, then why is there blood on his mask? Arthur took off his mask and said there was no permanent damage. Jasmine and Arthur moved on their way. He took out the very sheet that had been given to him and wrote to his parents that by the time they received this letter, he would probably already be in the dungeon. He knows he hasn't been home that much in the past couple of weeks, but they have to wait for him a little longer. Can they believe it's been almost 2 years? I still can't believe that Lily has woken up. Uncle Vincent must be terribly excited about this, but they shouldn't let him get too involved in hiring tutors for Lily. They should let her train at her own pace before she goes to the academy. By the way, they are putting in shifts. His strength is doing great, has increased compared to the time when he almost won against Dad in arm wrestling. And he broke through to the light orange stage. Jasmine is still helping him by creating the necessary conditions and teaching him what she knows about wind magic, while he teaches her new advanced sword techniques. In that case, as they promised, this will be his last journey as an adventurer until his schooling begins in a few weeks, so they'll see each other soon. He loves them. Jasmine asked him if he had finished writing. Arthur said yes. The stable owner said he would send the letter as soon as his horses returned. Jasmine said that Roran has trained all his horses to go back to the stable, so he has nothing to worry about. Arthur said she was right. Perhaps, for them, it will be much more dangerous to wait for them near the exit from the dungeon. Jasmine said that the team with whom they will go through the dungeon is probably already waiting for them, and asked him if Sylvie would go with them. Arthur shook his head. He said that she had been in touch with him all this time and had now become smart enough to send him more detailed messages, but still refuses to meet with them until she is ready, whatever that means. Jasmine said that she definitely wants to become as strong as possible before he goes to school. In the meantime, they should focus on their mission. They should hurry up. The people they were supposed to go to the dungeon with were already waiting for them. They noticed them and told each other that they were already here. Then a familiar voice said that it seemed they were stuck here with a bunch of amplifiers. Arthur turned at that voice and saw Lucas. He thought, is it really that child again? Then a man came up to them and said that they were two. The last one who signed up. It's good that they're with them. He will now introduce them to the group. Arthur shook his hand. The men praised him and said that he had a strong grip. It seems that some of the rumors about the masked swordsman were true after all. His name is Reginald Bastian, and he's in a great amplifier. The element is Earth, a solid yellow core stage. It seems they already know Lucas. He is an A rank mage at the dark yellow stage, which has an affinity with fire. He introduced the next one and said it was Creole Masser. He's an amp with a water element, and he's going to be their tank. From the last participant, I recognized Arthur and thought that he was another examinee, who was then assigned to the rank. What was his name? The guy got up and said his name was Elijah Knight. He is an A rank mage at the dark orange stage. It has an affinity with the earth element. The man who was next to him said his name was Oliver Hembit, a rank and mage at the dark yellow stage, and he's a deviant, who specializes in healing. Arthur thought it sounded a little cheeky, but the presence of the emitter was reassuring. Then the girl got up and said that it was her turn. Her name is Samantha. She is an Orango mage at the dark yellow stage and has an affinity only with the water element. She approached Arthur and said that she had heard a lot about him, so let him take care of her. Another participant came out and said he was Bralv Landon, and he is very happy to meet them too. He recently received AA rank, an amplifier at the light yellow stage. Its element is fire, and he will lead their group today. And they can also say a few words about themselves. Jasmine said that she is at the light yellow stage and an AA grade amplifier. She specializes in paired swords with the wind element. Landon said he was glad they had another AA rank in the group. Arthur said he's a note at the light orange stage. He is a grade A booster with a fire element. Samantha asked, what is the fire element? But she had heard that he had no affinity with any element. Arthur said that he hadn't used his magic for a long time for personal reasons. Samantha said she understood. Landon said he could see they were still carrying luggage. Don't they have spatial rings? Both shook their heads negatively. Landon called out to Lucas and said that he had. Lucas told them not to ask him, and Oliver already has it filled out. Oliver said he kept Miss Samantha's things. Elijah said he had some free space. Landon was delighted and said that it was excellent. After that, Elijah took a few of their things. Arthur thought that this was expected of Lucas, but he did not even assume that he had a spatial ring, since the technology was abandoned by the same ancient magicians who created the floating city of Xeris. Even one ring with a small storage costs 1,000 gold coins. Elijah asked, what is it all about? Arthur said yes, he thinks that's it, and thanked him for his help. Elijah smiled at him. Landon said it looks like everyone is ready, so it's time for them to come in. Landon said that they had almost reached the first level of the dungeon, so they should be on the alert. Lucas asked, what is it? Aren't there any monsters here? Landon said it was weird. Then some stone fell from above. Everyone immediately turned around to look. Landon immediately looked up, but what he saw there scared him very much. There were a bunch of scary monsters on the ceiling of this dungeon. He shouted that they were betrayers, and at that moment, all these monsters rushed at them. Oliver, from fright and surprise, could not do anything. But Jasmine had already rushed to his aid and shouted for him to duck. Landon shouted for them all to get in line. Oliver raised C and cast a spell. It was a spell, an increase in stability. Everyone dealt with these monsters quickly and deftly. Landon shouted at his team that there was no point in killing them all. They must conserve mana and their strength. But someone was still casting spells. Arthur asked what who, and of course it was Lucas, who cast a spell called Firestorm. All the monsters were burned to the ground. But Landon didn't like it. He walked up to Lucas and, grabbing him by the collar, asked what he had just been talking about. It was unnecessary to waste your mana on them. He knows what kind of dungeon it is. Lucas broke away and asked what was the problem. He killed them quickly so that the others could save their mana. Landon realized that it was useless to argue with him, so he turned to everyone and said that they needed to get out of here quickly before they came to their senses again. Arthur thought that these dungeons were sad, known for their mysterious inhabitants who avoided the clutches of death and could no longer be finally killed. Since there are no mana cores in monsters that are usually collected, adventurers and battles here are fruitless and endless. The first explorers of this dungeon called it the Gloomy Tomb. After that, the whole team moved on. Landon led the way. He stopped and said that this was the place where he had noticed the secret passage last time. Arthur thought that finally, the reason they came to this cursed dungeon. Landon asked Elijah if he could make small protrusions. Elijah stepped forward and, using his magic, did what Landon asked him to do. After that, everyone started climbing the wall. When everyone got in, Landon said that he could only get to the next floor, after which he decided to return with the team. There is no mention of what awaits him below, but he sees that the artifact that is responsible for the rebirth of these creatures may be there. Creole said that if he gets his share of the gold from the sale of everything that lies down there, then everything suits him. Landon laughed and said that, of course, then they need to go. The whole team moved on. They walked for a long time and in silence, but then Samantha stepped on something and Arthur rushed to her aid. It was very much like a trap. Everyone immediately stopped and looked around. Reginald asked Landon why he hadn't warned them there were traps. Landon also looked surprised and said they weren't there. When he was here before, you didn't have any traps. Oliver approached Samantha and asked if she was hurt. Maybe he should treat her. But Samantha threw his hand away and said she was fine without even looking at him. Everyone stared at Arthur, who took something out of the rock. He took out some kind of long claw and said that it was not a trap, but a mana beast. This was even more surprised. Landon told everyone to be on the lookout. After that, the team continued on its way. It was getting very hot, and then Landon said they were there. He looked ahead and said that there was something wrong here. Lucas said he was going to guess. It wasn't so hot here last time, was it? Landon said no. That's not the point. And Cord thought he felt it too. And it's not the barely perceptible heat, but the powerful aura in front of them. After that, they passed on. It was even hotter there. And then they felt some kind of rumbling and shaking of the earth. Reginald asked what was going on. Landon said he didn't know. And then a huge caterpillar burst right out of the ground. Oliver got scared and asked what is it. Landon immediately called out to Creole. Creole immediately used his magic. The whole team was now under a protective dome. Creole asked Landon if this thing was here last time. Landon said no, she wasn't. Creole said it was simply impossible for a new kind of mana beast to enter a dungeon like this. Landon shouted that the monster was coming, but he wasn't going to attack them, he just entered the ground again. Elijah said it didn't seem like they were his target. Then Oliver came forward and asked, what does it mean they'll just stand here and watch the worm dig the ground? Or will they still go after the artifact? Landon shouted for him to come back. Oliver ignored him and told Samantha to follow him. Although it's hard for him to stand everyone else, he would be happy to protect her. Samantha was scared and said she thought it was a bad idea. Landon shouted to Oliver that they needed to analyze what had happened now before moving further inside the cave. But Oliver wasn't listening. At that moment, Arthur turned his attention to the ground and realized that something was about to happen. He shouted at Lucas to use the fire barrier, and he reached for Landon. He grabbed him by the jacket and pulled him towards himself and shouted to Lucas that now. Lucas immediately used his magic and activated the fire barrier. Only Oliver was behind the barrier. Arthur called out to him and told him to use, but it was too late. All space except their barrier was exposed to fire. Lucas's barrier cracked, and then Samantha came to the rescue. She used a water barrier. Everyone immediately rushed to help Oliver on what they saw, plunged them into shock. Oliver was already dead, and only a skeleton remained of him. Reginald said, what the hell? Landon looked at Arthur. Arthur went up to Oliver and picked up a small green crystal, which was left of him. Picking it up, he tossed it to Samantha. He told her to change the crystal in her wand. This one is more powerful. Samantha said it was fine. Then Arthur said they'd better get out of here. Landon nodded at him. He got up and said that Noda was right. They need to get out of here before the next eruption of flames. And faster. After that, the whole team was already moving not on foot, but running. They had already seen the end of this area and were about to run into the next tunnel. But this worm got in their way again. Landon shouted to Creole again. The man already understood everything without words, and activated his magic again. Landon shouted at Samantha and Elijah to stun him. Samantha immediately cast a spell and applied Serena's howl. Elijah also did not lag behind and used the capture of the stone serpent. Landon thought that Elijah's spell hadn't even left a scratch on him. He shouted to Jasmine and Reginald to follow him. They both nodded. Landon said, Jasmine, that they would distract him more. Reginald should try to get into the gap between his eyes. Jasmine said she understood. Reginald said it was accepted. Landon said that if it turns out that this is not enough to eliminate, then Lucas and Noda should be able to find a vulnerable spot. Lucas, watching all this, thought, is he really scared? Arthur thought that ordinary fire spells didn't have enough firepower to harm this worm. It just means that his spell must be even hotter. After that, Arthur grabbed his sword and rushed straight at this worm. He jumped and applied an explosive step. He wounded this monster and shouted, Jasmine, what now? and then Jasmine attacked him. The whiskey of this worm was heard. Landon called out to Lucas, but Creole told him to wait. The worm escapes. Landon said he thinks they're safe for now. They need to move on. He walked up to Jasmine and touched her shoulder, saying that it was a good job. Jasmine turned to Lucas, Arthur and Samantha and said they needed to hurry. Lucas asked if it was really just necessary to intimidate this overgrown worm. But then the rumble was heard again and the earth shook again. Arthur said the worm wasn't trying to kill them. He was just stalling until the next eruption. Everyone rushed to each other's aid. Jasmine held out her hand to Arthur, but Arthur noticed Lucas and rushed to his aid. The witch Lucas was really scared and even dropped his staff. Arthur cast a spell, and thus protected Lucas. After another outburst, Lucas got up and pushed Arthur away, and told him to get rid of him. Tur looked at Landon and called out to him, and only then did everyone pay attention to the fact that Landon lost his arm protecting Samantha. Everyone immediately ran to his aid. Reginald held him while Arthur cauterized the wound. Reginald told the legend, well, to keep him conscious. Arthur told him to hold him tight. After some time, they finally stopped the bleeding. Arthur sat down nearby and exhaled. The Creole came up to him and handed him a sandwich, asking that why wouldn't he try it? Will it help him cheer up? He sat down next to Arthur and said that these were his special hiking sandwiches. He keeps them for those moments when he feels bad. During the passage of dungeons, Arthur thanked him. Creole said that it is best to eat them, slightly heated from the inside, just enough to melt the cheese. Arthur did so. He was going to try this sandwich, but then Creole coughed and said that he, too, please, too. Then they ate their sandwiches. The man asked Arthur what was delicious, didn't he? Arthur said very much. Creole said that his fiancée came up with this recipe herself, right down to how to dry and season the beef. Arthur said that well, and he was lucky. He asks me to convey his gratitude to his fiancée for such a delicious meal. Creole smiled at him and said that he would. Well, yes, they heard the screams that Reginald shouted for them both to stop already. Lucas was yelling at Landon. He asked him, what, is he wrong? The only reason he agreed to participate in this was because their leader is an AA rank veteran amplifier. And now not only their leader is a colleague, but they have also lost the emitter. Landon couldn't stand it and jumped up and told Lucas that he still dared to complain after dropping his own weapon, as if he was walking, and Note had to save him. Lucas said he had everything under control, unlike him, who is not even able to protect himself. London said he had to cover for Samantha, which he couldn't have done if he had been alert and put up the barrier in time. He did it, they wouldn't be like this right now. But then Arthur came and shouted that it was enough. Everyone felt the pressure again. He turned to Lucas and told him to get his head out of his ass. Lucas looked at him and asked, what's what? He approached him and said that the amplifier, which is only at the orange stage. Arthur interrupted him and said that he didn't care about the yellow stage, the silver stage, or God himself. Right now, the only thing he is a burden. Lucas didn't answer him, just walked past him, hitting him with his shoulder. Reginald turned to Landon and said that he was going to take care of his own wounded now, and he should try to get some rest. Arthur turned to Landon and said that before moving on, he needed to make a decision. Reginald has a couple of burns, but his wounds can be cured. The others have to cope too, but he needs to decide whether he wants to continue or not. London was already having a very hard time. He said he would move on. This will definitely be his last dungeon raid, so he has to go all the way. Samantha shouted that how was he going to fight with one hand. Landon said he was still an AA grade amplifier, and will not detain them. However, he thinks that Noda should lead the group. He was the most reasonable of them all, even when faced with unforeseen circumstances. He has talent. He looked at Creole, Reginald, and Elijah. They all nodded. He looked at Jasmine and Samantha, who also nodded. He exhaled and said okay. They should rest for an hour before moving on. After a while, they finally moved on. Landon said he didn't understand. Even that part has changed. This tunnel has not been blocked before. Reginald said that well, they wouldn't help the case by whining. Then he tried to destroy this wall. However, on the first attempt, he failed. Then he used his explosive blow and struck again. But this time it didn't work out either. Then Jasmine came up to him from behind and touched his shoulder, told him to try again. This time she decided to help him. Reginald nodded. After that, he hit Jasmine, strengthened his attack, and this time they succeeded. They saw a beautiful clearing. Then we went inside. They all started looking around. Arthur thought that there were not even any pillars that should hold the vaults of this cave. How has it not collapsed yet? Creole asked, what about taking a break here? He's a little sleepy. Arthur thought he'd take a break, didn't he? However, he tightened his grip on the sword hilt and said that they would not stop here. There's something wrong with this place, so they have to be careful. Creole asked if he was sure. He hears nothing and sees nothing around him except trees and grass. They walked on, and Arthur thought there was something about this place that made him nervous. But what is it? What had he overlooked? Then Jasmine saw who you were and froze. She looked scared, but I was able to recover because I heard a sound. It was Creole who dropped his shield. He was weird, too. He looked ahead and asked, "Is that really Clara? Is it really her?" He reached out his hand to touch her. Reginald looked at him and asked if he was okay. But the man did not pay any attention to him and did not even hear him. He started crying and said he knew she couldn't die. She should be standing there because he is already coming to her. Arthur cursed and looked in the direction of Creole. He shouted at him to stop because it was dangerous. But then Jasmine grabbed his hand and said that it seemed to her that the fog made them see their illusions. Arthur thought that this was the reason why he was so restless. He shouted for everyone to stick together. This fog deceives their senses, and said that both Samantha used her barrier. Samantha nodded. Then she used her spell and created a water barrier. She asked that who is Clara. Reginald and Landon exchanged glances. Reginald said it was Creole's fiancée. But she can't be alive because she was killed in the dungeon. Landon said he saw it with his own eyes, too. They cremated her and buried her ashes. Reginald said they needed to find him. Lucas was just furious and asked why nothing was going according to plan at all. Are they really experienced adventurers? Arthur turned his attention to Jasmine and realized that something was wrong with her. He asked if she was okay. Jasmine looked at him and apologized, saying that she was just a little shocked. And what did he ask? Did she really see something too? Jasmine said that not something, but someone. She saw her father holding out his hands to her and smiling. Arthur touched her hand and told her that she would be fine. Jasmine looked at him and smiled. After that, Arthur said, "Okay, now they need to get back to this damn fog," and asked Jasmine if she had a spell to dispel it. Jasmine said it wasn't strong enough to get rid of him entirely, but she thought she could clear a path for them to find Creole. After which she recited a spell. Arthur told Samantha to remove the barrier. Jasmine used the Banshee cry. Banshee is a sad harbinger, who with her blood-curdling moans and sobs warns of an imminent demise. And then the true picture of this place opened up before them. Everyone was very surprised. After all, this place was not as beautiful as it might seem to them. Arthur thought that how could they not notice so many vines in the fog? Moreover, Jasmine's spell didn't affect them at all. Arthur turned to the team and said that they were approaching fast. He turned to Lucas and said that now was a great time to show himself. Lucas shouted that there was no need to tell him about it. He read their spell and applied her magic called the Smoldering Crescent. The entire vine was burned. It should have been burned, but that didn't happen. Lucas wondered if his spell was ineffective. Arthur thought it couldn't be that simple after all, could it? He turned to Reginald and told him to protect the spellcasters while they prepared their strongest attacks. And he turned to Jasmine and Landon and told them to follow him. They both nodded. Arthur said they had to make their way, but it was the manhole that was growing together again. The severed branches grew back. Arthur wondered if the vines didn't burn because there was moisture inside them. Then he decided to attack them in a different way, and this time he succeeded. Arthur turned around and shouted at Landon to use a withering spell on his. But apparently Landon was also exposed to this fog. Landon said that do they really think that just a few overgrown roots are enough to defeat an AA rank amplifier? Arthur thought he was acting recklessly now. He looked at Jasmine and thought that was to be expected. It seems that she doesn't need his help, so he ran to Landon. Laza had already tied him up, but then Arthur arrived and freed him. He looked at Landon and said that he had said that this would be his last dungeon raid. It's because he's planning to die here, isn't it? If this is not the case, then he should not lose his head. Do they still need it? At that moment, Lucas drank some potion and used his magic. It was a firefall. Arthur thought that this was a weaker spell, but for that his flame spreads easily once he touches the target. It looks like Lucas is still thinking straight. Then Reginald yelled at Elijah to be careful, but then Landon arrived and helped Elijah. After that, Elijah cast his spell. This spell was called a funnel. Arthur thought that because of the collapsed earth and the spread of liquid fire, the vines must be difficult to regenerate. And thanks to Samantha's spell, they should have plenty of time to search for Creole. Samantha used a spell to extract water. Water extraction is a useful spell, usually used to collect water from the environment. Samantha managed to do it. Arthur turned around to thank her and say that it was a good job. But I saw that Samantha had fainted. He picked her up and said that to think so much, she used a spell that was created for household needs in a situation like this. Great job. But then the moisture returned again. Lucas thought it didn't work. Arthur shouted that because of their spells, the vines had swallowed up all the fog they need. But then he looked at them and saw the horror on their faces. So I decided to see for myself what happened there. And having looked there, he himself was horrified. Everyone felt a huge pressure. In front of them stood a huge monster made of vines. Arthur even dropped his sword. Samantha fell down in horror and said that this simply could not be. Had she only seen him in books. This is the guardian of the ancient forest. Even Landon was scared and said it seemed the gods really didn't want them to stay alive. Arthur looked at him and thought that he was not himself. Reginald said yes, were they mocking him? What the hell is an S-rank mana beast doing here? He looked closely at this monster and asked, what is really a Cryol? The very center of this monster was the Cryol. He kept begging her not to leave. Everyone froze in horror. Reginald didn't wait any longer because his friend was already dead, so he decided to act. Arthur shouted that he wasn't. He ran after Reginald and said they shouldn't fight it. But Reginald made it so that Arthur could not approach him. He threw him aside with the help of magic. Jasmine was scared for Arthur and shouted his name. Arthur shouted to Elijah to protect him. Elijah immediately cast a spell and created a barrier. Arthur was about to help them, but then he was grabbed by the arm. It was Jasmine who said they needed to leave. Arthur asked what and what about them. He promised them that. But Jasmine interrupted him and said that, and she promised his family. She promised them that she would keep him safe this time. Reginald has already swung to hit this monster and called him a huge piece of wood. Arthur said, Jasmine, that they would leave, but not like that. They can't just abandon them. Jasmine gathered her strength and exhaled. Meanwhile, the ranger on the ice also struck at the monster. They heard a loud roar. The team immediately rushed to the exit. Lucas ran ahead, and Arthur was carrying Samantha and told Elijah to cover Jasmine until she picked up Landon, and immediately had to run to the exit. Elijah said it was fine, but then they noticed that Reginald was in his paws, which the monster was about to devour. Arthur turned to Lucas and told him to set fire to the vines around, but Lucas pointed his weapon at them and then attacked. Arthur was able to stand on his feet and hit Lucas. Lucas looked towards the exit and thought that this was not about him. He looked at the team that was now trying to survive and saved each other. Lucas thought he was from the Great Wykes family. He picked up his staff and thought that as the heir of one of the main houses that led Sapin to victory over Elinor. He got up and thought it was his duty. After that, he pointed his staff at Arthur, and I thought that I would stay alive and continue my family. Then he attacked Arthur. Arthur flew to the side. Jasmine was very scared and immediately rushed to him. Lucas shouted at her to stay away. After that, he attacked her. Elijah called Jasmine, and he made sure that she did not fall to the ground. Lucas now pointed his staff at him and told him not to even try to throw anything if he didn't want to suffer from the explosion either. Elijah asked what the hell he was doing. Lucas asked if he really thought he would risk his life in order to help them. Commoners, get out. They should be proud that they will remain in the memory of people as valiant heroes who restrained this monster for the sake of his salvation. He will tell everyone about their brave deeds. At that moment, Elijah was thrown back by the monster. He was lying on the ground and thought no. The monsters were about to attack him, but Landon came to his aid. Elijah got up and thought, is it really Landon? Then he turned to this monster and asked, well, what? Is he going to bully these kids any further? Better let him fight him. And then Landon rushed into battle. He cut the monster in half, but it fused again. London was very scared. Meanwhile, Arthur began to recover. Elijah tried to crawl up to him and called out to him. He looked at Elijah, there on Jasmine nearby, who was unconscious, and also at Landon, who was now fighting a monster. He thought it looked like he really didn't have a choice. But will he be able to survive the recoil after its application? He stood up and applied the skill. He applied the second stage of Dragon Awakening. Arthur thought that his training at Elinor had led to several breakthroughs in his development as a beast tamer, and this constantly baffled Virion. Vibrio. His first breakthrough led to the discovery of Stage 1, Acquisition. By using one of Sylvia's innate skills, he could temporarily be out of time and space. The use of this stage was largely limited due to the fact that it put a huge strain on his mana core and physical body. However, the second breakthrough was unexpected for everyone. who achieved what Virion only decades later. It took him only 2.5 years. The integration stage. Sylvie sensed that something was happening to Arthur, and immediately flew in search of him. She told him she would be there soon. Arthur told her that everything was fine. He wants her to stay away for now. If something happens, she has to go back to Helsja's house for him. But Sylvie said no, she can help. Arthur asked her to listen to him. Sylvie said it was fine. Just let him be careful. Arthur, getting to his feet, went to this monster and said that now they will play. He rushed into battle and thought that he didn't blame Virion for knocking him out after his first stage of integration release. He needs to get it over with as soon as possible, and he will hope that he will survive the recoil. He struck, but nothing came of it. He thought that even if he could use all the surrounding mana in this form, his body still can't handle this spell. He rushed at the monster again and attacked it again. This time he succeeded, and the whole monster froze. And then Arthur smashed it. Then he fell to his knees and began to bleed. Then he collapsed and lost consciousness. Meanwhile, in Xyrus, Alice asked why their 8-year-old daughter still manages to play so actively that she just falls asleep on the floor. Ray said that in her defense, he could say that after Lilia woke up, Ellie began to train very hard in order to catch up with her. They put their daughter to bed, and Alice said she hoped that was the reason. She's eerily reminiscent of him in the past. And then the ring on Alice's finger lit up. She asked that it couldn't be true, could it? The ring should be broken, shouldn't it? Arthur finally woke up. Next to him was Elijah. He was very worried about him, and he said that thank God he had woken up. Arthur told him to break the stone on the glove, so Elijah did. And then Arthur recovered. He remembered all the moments and thought that Lucas. He was furious. He tried to get up, but could not and collapsed again. He asked that where is Jasmine? Elijah pointed his finger at him and told him she was right here. Lucas's spell had hurt her a lot more, and besides, her body wasn't enhanced with mana. He had a first aid kit with him, so he was able to treat her burns, but he thinks she may have internal injuries. Arthur got up again and told this guy to take the stone from his glove and use it on her. Elijah and from the bodies. Elijah said her breathing got better. He thinks she's going to be fine. After a few hours of rest, Arthur collapsed again and thought that thank God he had the healing stones that his mother had made for him. He smiled and thought that he hadn't felt so terrible since he was 4 years old. Those were good times. Sylvie felt that Arthur was alright now and thought that Dad had finally woken up, and asked him if he was okay. Arthur said yes, he was fine now, and he asked where she was now. Sylvie said she listened to him and stayed away. Lucas, exhausted, was passing not far from Sylvie. Arthur told Sylvie that it was fine. They're safe now, so she can focus on her training. Sylvie said it wasn't that important. Arthur said that thanks to their connection, he is sure that it is very important. She should believe him, because they are just resting now. Sylvia wanted to say something to him, but Arthur interrupted her and told her to continue doing what she had to do. They'll see each other soon. Elijah asked him if he was feeling any better already. Arthur said that he feels so good that he is ready to run a marathon. Elijah laughed, and he said that in any case, he would never have thought that Noda, the legendary masked swordsman with whom they passed the exam, would be the same age as him. Only at that moment did Arthur realize that he was not wearing a mask. Elijah apologized and said that she had fallen during the battle, he could not find her. Arthur jumped up and asked what about his sword? Did he see the black stick he was carrying? Elijah pointed behind his back, said she was over there. He didn't know if it was valuable or not, just in case he brought it with him. Arthur exhaled and thanked him for it, for saving him and Jasmine, and for taking his sword with him when he could have just escaped alone. So thank him very much. Elijah said that well, if he left them half dead here, it would put him on a par with that asshole Lucas, wouldn't it? Arthur said not at all. Elijah said he was most interested in why he stayed when the guardian of the ancient forest showed up. He had seen that Jasmine was trying to make him leave. Arthur said the king would never betray his people, and he also promised someone very important to him that he would get better and cherish the people around him. Elijah laughed again and said he sounded like an old man. What kind of life he had to live in order to promise someone such a thing. Arthur said that sometimes he surprises himself. But enough about that. He began to look around and asked, by the way, how long had he been unconscious? Elijah said it was hard to say, but definitely more than a day. Arthur tried to get up again and said that it was okay. It seems they will have to stay a little longer here until Jasmine recovers, so they may well use this time to get to know each other better. He held out his hand to him and said his name was Arthur. Elijah shook his hand, and Arthur added that, but he could just call him Art. Arthur slammed his hand against the wall that was around them and told Elijah that it didn't look like it was created by nature. This metal shell is his handiwork, isn't it? Elijah said he created it as soon as the cave started to collapse. He thinks that the body of the guardian of the ancient forest supported the entire cave. Arthur said that even if he is a deviant, he is absolutely sure that he should have the ability to control only the already existing metal, but not to create or summon it. Only assuming he's a dwarf. Elijah asked that was his secret, wasn't it? Arthur laughed and asked him to tell him about it. Elijah thought for a while, then looked at Arthur and asked, "What about this?" He will tell him if he also explains what he was doing there then. His hair even acquired a snow-white shade, and these shining symbols that appeared on his body, and his eyes. His eyes were flickering with a violet light. Arthur said that he would tell him about it well, after which Elijah said that okay, in his suspicions, he was right about one thing. Although he grew up in the kingdom of Darv, he is not sure where exactly he comes from. Elder Radius has been taking care of him since he can remember, but has always avoided talking about his parents, and his only childhood memories come during painful and disconcerting outbursts. Despite this, he lived quite normally, but as soon as he reached the dark orange core stage, there was a mysterious surge of energy which caused him to lose consciousness.